Debbie. I realize I could potentially. Look at you. Seat number one. Come sit in the front. Usually, like, everybody's scared. Oh.
Good morning. I'm John Chinberg, music director here at UUCS, and we'll be starting with a gathering hymn, which is 1003 in the teal hymnal. And while you're grabbing that, I'm going to share with you that those of you who know me know that I love singing in rounds. I love singing around. If you were here last Sunday, you have a point of reference there maybe. Seriously, when we create this cascade of single note lines that intersect, we appreciate how what we do resonates with what others are doing, and it's pretty cool. I like the way it all comes together. I hope you'll enjoy this too. I invite you now to rise in body or spirit as you are able, and we will sing, "Where Do We Come From?" Now, one word of instruction here. We'll sing the song without repeats. One line, then the next, then the next, then the next. Then we're going to slice this choir or this congregation in half, actually in fourths, and I'll cue your section when to start singing that first part. And if that's confusing for you, just sing that last line over and over and over again, and we'll all end up together at the same place. Barbara's going to give us those first notes. Everybody's going to sing with me now as we sing, "Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Mystery, mystery, life is a rhythm and a mystery. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? When are we going? Where do we come from? What are we? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Where do we come from? Where are we going? Last line. Where do we come from? Where are we going? Y'all did very well. That's way better than last Sunday.
See if I'm live. I am the Reverend Monica Jacobson Tennessen, and I'm wired for sound. I have a dear colleague friend who used to get up and run 5 miles in the morning before she led a church service, because once you've done that, nothing else seems that hard. So if singing around was intimidating for you, guess what? Once you've done that, the rest of the service will be pretty straightforward. I have the delight of serving this congregation as minister, and I had the delight this week of creating a new or very old paper order of service for us. Hopefully you got one. We're doing these because the projector is on spring break from now until like July. Nice work if you can get it. So if you're here in the sanctuary and you don't have a paper order of service and you'd like one, you can find one out in the foyer. I want you to know that I made it because I want you to know that any errors or omissions are my responsibility. Do not complain to Sarah. Do not complain to Emma. Tell me. I made it. I also want to remind you that perfection offends the gods. So any errors you find are just proof that I have kept us all safe from lightning strikes this weekend, so you're welcome. Please do tell me if there's anything you notice where you're like, oh, that's missing, or that's odd, or simply, I didn't really understand why it was printed that way. Send me an email. I want to know about it. It matters to me that we make orders of service that help us all feel connected and included, which is also why you'll find handy-dandy announcements on the back. More on that later. Our opening words this morning come from my colleague, the Reverend Katie Romano Griffin. Come, let us enter into this space of hope and community. Come, let us enter this space with our sorrows, our joys, our passion, and compassion. Come, let us enter this space with the stories of our ancestors, for their strength and wisdom beats in our hearts. Come into this space, present to the beloved companions who move beside us. Come into this space mindful that together we are building a future for other generations. Come into this space and let us worship together.
Let us start by saying our affirmation together. Need a hint? Open your new. Love is our doctrine.
Compassion is our way. Here we seek to create a joyful home for free religious exploration, build a community of caring fellowship, nurture the hopes, and serve the needs of our world. One of the kids found it.
We light our chalices this morning with the words of Reverend Cynthia Landrum. Flame of our faith, call us into the community of love and justice this morning and every morning. Each week we light 3 chalices. The first is for those of us here at the Unitarian Universalist congregation, our friends and members. Second chalice we light for our partner church, Trumafalva, Transylvania, Romania. And the third we light for our children and youth, both in religious education as well as around the world. Please join me in singing the flames into life.
Rise up, O flame, by thy light glowing, show to us beauty, vision, and joy. I have a story for us to share. Molly Brown, our Director of Lifespan Religious Education, was unable to be here this morning, but I am delighted to get to share this story. So if you are anyone who is young or young at heart who would like to come forward, sit in the front row, sit on the floor, you're very welcome to do so. You're also welcome to stay exactly where you are. If you are joining us online, it is up to you whether you sit on the floor or not. You do you. Our story this morning is a story called Hard Truths, and it was written by a man named David Petit, who was a Unitarian Universalist minister. One of the more important things that we do as Unitarian Universalists is we try to seek the truth in love. Has anyone ever heard that phrase before? I see a couple nods and hands. This might sound easy to do. Might sound hard to do. So what happens when you think you know one story, but while you are seeking the truth about it, an entirely different story comes out? Well, that's what happened to the author of this story a couple years ago. In David's family, he was the person who knows more than anyone else about their ancestors. His grandfather used to be this person, as was his father before him. And over time, lots of great stories were collected about the family and passed down. David was so proud of all that his ancestors had done, and he decided he wanted to keep learning as much as he could. And the internet made the search for old records so much easier. When David's grandfather wanted to do research about their ancestors, he had to use his vacation time and travel somewhere to do research. But David could sit down at his computer and he could find those same records right there at his fingertips. One day in 2006, David found an old record from the 1770s. It was searchable online, so he typed in his ancestor's name. And he learned that living in his ancestor's house in Rhode Island, there were 4 enslaved African people. This was a huge surprise. David had never heard this story. He wondered if maybe the story made his family feel so embarrassed or uncomfortable that they stopped talking about it. And then maybe they forgot. It was also a surprise to David that there had been slavery in New England. He had thought that only happened in the South. But slavery was practiced in the northern United States for more than 200 years. And the more David learned about the truth, the more he wanted to know what really had happened. After a year of researching, he learned that not only did he have several family members who had enslaved African people, David also had an ancestor who was the captain of a ship that brought enslaved people from Africa. This news was really hard to accept at first, and it made David feel ashamed about his family. Can anybody imagine what that might feel like? Finding that kind of story? But David decided he was going to seek the truth in love. Because he came to know so much about his ancestor, who was a ship's captain, David decided he would travel to Africa and see with his own eyes the places his ancestor had been. Amazingly, some of the buildings were still standing, and walking in his ancestor's footsteps made the history come alive even more. But the most unexpected thing was that David began to feel different inside about this story. While the story was about bondage, he began to feel liberated from feeling so ashamed and to feel that he could talk truthfully about a story that is still uncomfortable for so many people to talk about. When David got back home, there was even more work to be done. He wanted to locate a person whose ancestor had been enslaved by his ancestor. He wanted to share all that he had learned. He hoped this information might help this person understand their own family history better. David felt that their two families were already joined by a common history. So even though the life stories of African Americans were often not recorded in official public records, David learned that many African American families kept their own records. They did the best they could to leave a trail behind for others to follow. And one day, David found mention of a person with the same last name and began researching him, and gradually his life story began to emerge. It became clear he was one of the African people who had been enslaved in David's ancestors' home. David found out who his descendants were and their descendants, and he traced that family all the way down to the present day until one day he called up Pat, who lived in New York City. He was really afraid Pat would be mad at him because of what his ancestor had done to her ancestor, but it felt like the right thing to do to contact her. And she wasn't mad at him at all. She was grateful that David had made the effort to learn as much as he could and that he was willing to share it. Pat had not been able to learn very much about her family history, and David's information helped her fill in a lot of gaps of missing information. Pat and David became good friends. They referred to each other as cousins, and they have since met other people, those connected by ancestors who enslaved and ancestors who were enslaved, and shared in important conversations with them. What started out as something that felt embarrassing and shameful for David now felt very hopeful. And while the legacy of slavery is still something that makes a lot of people feel uncomfortable, unhappy, ashamed, there is also a way forward when we can face the truth together and build a new legacy. So that is part of what we are going to be exploring for the adults who stay in the sanctuary. For those of you who are going to go to our religious education program, you'll be able to follow Carrie Lynn out with the lantern. And I'd like to ask the center aisle to make a love arch for us. We're going to sing as you go out. The lyrics are printed in your orders of service. Wherever you walk in love. Wherever you walk in peace. Wherever you walk in beauty all around you. Our hearts go with you. Will you join with me in a little meditation written by my friend and colleague and friend of this congregation, the Reverend Mary Geer? I invite you to imagine holding a ball of light, maybe a glass ball reflecting the color of the sun. It's not too hot. It's warm and comforting to your touch. Maybe it's like a beach ball, light and airy and comfortable, or any other ball that you can imagine. As your body is comfortable and as you breathe in, raise that ball to the sky. You can do this with your arms and hands if you'd like. You can do it with your mind. Imagine your ball reaching out, absorbing the warmth and the light of the sun. warm, cozy, comforting. And now as you breathe out, lower your ball down to your belly. Soak in the warmth and light. Breathe. Now once more, as you breathe in, raise your ball to the sky, toward the moon and the stars, the cool and quiet night sky. Stars glowing in the vastness of space. Imagine your ball absorbing the cool and the quiet of night. As you breathe out, lower your ball to your belly, soaking in the cool and the quiet of night. Now, one last time, as you breathe in, raise your ball to the sky, toward all the planets and solar systems and galaxies out in the vast and beautiful universe. Imagine your ball connected to that vastness, absorbing the mystery and beauty of space. And as you breathe out and lower your ball to your belly, soak in the mystery and beauty of the universe. Breathe. In gratitude for this day, for this earth, for this community, for this life, we pray. Blessed be, and amen. I invite you to bring your attention back to this space. Eric is going to share with us some of the joys and sorrows of our community.
Good morning. I'm Eric Schumann, your Lifeline's lay minister this morning, and we have both joys and sorrows to share. The first one is from Margaret Gregg. 2 years ago, Marge French moved to Boone Ridge Retirement Community with her beloved Sid Tice. Sid passed away a few weeks ago, and today would have been his 103rd birthday. So please join us in silently wishing Sid a happy birthday, in memory of a very special person who was easy to get to know and easy to love. Sid, Marge misses you terribly, and so do all of us who were privileged to know you. Happy birthday, dear friend. From George Struble, I have been approved for cochlear implants, so sometime this summer I will be able to hear better and even play my cello with others once again. Does that mean we have to be careful about what we say around George? Leave it to Sarah Pickett to pose a question like that. And from Molly Kennedy, please pray for the mental and physical health of dear chosen family members, Miriam, Melissa, Jean, Kia, and EJ. We light one more candle for those joys and sorrows which are unspoken but are in our hearts this morning. If you have joys or sorrows within your heart that you would like to share with others, with Lifeline's lay ministers, we will be in the fellowship hall immediately after the service. You can see us at our table. And you can also reach us at the email address that's printed on the back of your order of service.
You may remain seated as we sing our heart song, number 95, There Is More Love Somewhere. There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere.
Today's first reading comes from Embracing Rootedness and Radical Genealogy by Aurora Levins Morales. Racialism, from races or roots, is the practice of rooting ourselves in the real, concrete histories of our people, our families, our local communities, our ethnic communities. It is radical genealogy, history made personal. It is a keeping of accounts. Its intent is to pierce the immense, mind-deadening denial that permeates daily life and drowns out our deepest grief and horror about the founding and ongoing atrocities of racism, class, and patriarchy in endless chatter about trivialities. Oppression buries the actual lives of real and contradictory people in the crude generalizations of bigotry and punishes us for not matching the caricature, refusing all evidence of who we actually are in defiance of its tidy categories. It is a blunt instrument, used for bashing not only our dangerous complexities, but also the ancient and permanent fact of our involvement with each other. Racialism or rootedness is the choice to bear witness to our specific, contradictory historical identities in relationship to one another. It's an accounting of the debts and assets we have inherited, and acknowledging the precise nature of that inheritance is an act of spiritual and political integrity.
Thank you, Sarah. Back in 2020, I attended a de-escalation training at which the facilitator said, "Peace is not the absence of conflict. Peace is the presence of justice." And a bunch of people were like, what? Peace is about not having to feel uncomfortable. She was like, no, just kidding. Peace is the presence of justice. What is necessary does not always feel peaceful if we're using a definition of peace that just means untroubled. Peace as the presence of justice requires us to be able to move through chaos and tension and, yes, some conflict. And about a year and a half ago, I remembered this vividly as I began researching some of my own genealogy. As a white American, I think it's fair to say I've spent the last 10 plus years coming to understand more and more about what it actually means to be white in this country. I've come to understand more about the privileges that I get from my racial identity, some of which I didn't even notice until I learned enough to start looking for them. I've learned about the idea that whiteness is created and has been a moving target throughout our history. People have been excluded or included for arbitrary reasons that sometimes have nothing to do with skin pigmentation. A lot of you know my spouse is a biologist. This makes him really mad. He's like, it's not even phenotypically consistent. Maybe you've read some of those books about how the Irish became white. White is a moving and political category. But when I looked at history, and I love to look at history, when I looked at the big movements and the small moments, I always did it through my comfortable idea that my ancestors had not even arrived in North America until the 19th century. They were part of waves of farming immigrants from Europe, and yes, they were definitely part of the land grab that pushed indigenous Americans off their traditional and ancestral homes in the Great Plains. Yes, I am pretty certain that my ancestors were taught and said and did very racist things toward the indigenous folks whose land they were stealing. But there was this other little part of me that was like, well, okay, I have some distance from that other stuff in American history. Are you getting ready for the plot twist? Okay, so about a year and a half ago, I started to get into genealogical research, and at the same time, someone in my social media feed posted about this class called Before We Were White. This was an online class for people of European ancestry wanting to dig in to what our ancestors had known and practiced, how they had connected to the land they lived on, who they were before they were taught that they were just white Americans. This sounded perfect. I wanted to learn this. I wanted to pair it with my genealogical research, and I wanted to teach it to my daughter. I found some surprises. Turns out that not all of my ancestors arrived on this continent in the 19th century. On each side of my family of origin, I have one great-great-great-grandparent who is descended from Europeans who came to North America in the 1600s. So there goes all my comfortable distance from several centuries of history. Anybody ever had this experience? Anybody suspect you might have this experience if you started digging? Yeah. Now, I want to pause here to acknowledge that one kind of white privilege, one way that life is invisibly a little easier for me, is found in this kind of genealogical work. My ancestors were people with the identities that were recorded, whose records were preserved. And now it is true that if you go back past a certain point, it's only my male ancestors who were written down because patriarchy. But it's also true that genealogical research can be much harder if you are researching your ancestors who are Black or who are Indigenous or who are Latina, and so on. As I traced one of my ancestral lines back, I found many generations of people living in North Carolina. One of them was a Confederate soldier in the Civil War. Didn't like that one. But his grandfather, who was also from North Carolina, fought on the American side in the Revolutionary War, so that was a little more comfortable. But then his father, who lived his entire life in Massachusetts, fought in what is now called King Philip's War, so called because the leader of the Pokanoket Wampanoag tribe at the time, a man named Metacom, had taken the name Philip for the purpose of interacting with the English colonists. In 1675, the English colonists had been in armed conflict with the Wampanoag in what is considered to be the deadliest war in colonial American history. So an unexpected part of history had just become personal for me. I had not guessed that I was connected to those stories. For a few years, I lived and served a congregation in southeastern Massachusetts, and I went to museums and I read placards about King Philip's War, and I sort of shook my head. I did not know I had an ancestor who was part of that terrible and deadly conflict. It was not comfortable to learn this. And I wondered, how had I not known? Why was it not talked about? But like the story we heard from David Petit, and like our instructor said in Before We Were White, most white American families are encouraged to just forget about these kinds of things. We are encouraged, if we are white, not to worry about where our ancestors came from or what their lives were like, harms they endured or harms they caused. It's a kind of cultural amnesia. And again, I pause here to note that while white folks are encouraged to forget, often Black and Indigenous folks have had their histories erased or destroyed by structures of power. And you know, in some ways, all this disconnection from our heritage, I think, is really meant to make us good consumers, which is what capitalism wants, right? Doesn't matter about your racial identity. If you have money to spend, capitalism wants you to spend it. And if you have been cut off from your roots, you probably will buy whatever thing is advertised to you next in the hope that it will solve your problems. Has anybody else ever had a really targeted Instagram ad and clicked it before you thought very hard about it? This is part of how the system works. If we don't feel connected to our larger communities, to our webs of life, to our ancestors, we are susceptible to the whims of the moment. And in other ways, this disconnection is meant to keep us separate from really feeling and connecting with our history and with each other. Did you know that the concept of whiteness was created in America to keep lower-class laborers in the colonies, people who were British, people who came from other parts of Europe, people who had been brought from Africa, often against their will, people who were Indigenous Americans? It was meant to keep them all from joining together to protest exploitation by the wealthy. In the earliest days of the Maryland colony, British and African laborers worked, ate, and formed relationships together. They lived under similar conditions, and they all had the same opportunities when they were free. So in other words, any man, because patriarchy, any man who had worked off his contract, whether of indenture or of enslavement, became able to vote, able to enslave others, able to marry a person of his choosing, regardless of their national origin. African men in the Maryland colony could and did vote, could and did enslave others, could and did marry British women, until in 1681, Maryland's governors passed a law declaring that white women could not marry Black men, and therefore created the category of white for the first time on the North American continent. More laws were passed to create and reinforce these divisions. There was a prohibition against free Black men holding public office. There was a prohibition against free Black men owning guns. There was a requirement that when white men completed their term of service and became free, they had to be given guns and gunpowder. These laws did not do anything to change the economic status of white laborers relative to the wealthy few. What they did do was create a white identity that somehow became more relevant and more important than any other identities that people held, and therefore separated white laborers from their black and indigenous neighbors. If you want to know more about this, look up Jacqueline Batalora's work. She has a fabulous presentation. It's available on YouTube. So in this way, the laboring class, which was the vast majority of people in the Maryland colony, were given reasons to mistrust each other. They were discouraged from working together to change the way the wealthy profited from everybody else's labor and exploitation. And if you are wondering what this might look like today, you might consider the huge amounts of energy spent on attempting and sometimes succeeding to ban trans students from playing sports. Often the number of trans students who are on athletic teams in any given state is fewer than 10 in the entire state. Trans people of all ages make up something like 1% of the US population, but the billionaires out there sure would like to keep us focused on threats to women's sports, right? This is an old tactic. As I went through this class before we were white, one of our instructors said, okay, a lot of you came into this class carrying the lens of liberal anti-racism, which generally says, gosh, white people have been jerks throughout history. We should try to be less jerky. He said, you know, what we're working on here is actually radical anti-racism, which says racism was created as a trick to keep us separate from each other. It hurts us in different ways, and it makes us easier for the powerful few to exploit. Hearing this, I began to imagine some of my ancestors as people who had fallen for that trick of separating from their roots and turning against their neighbors. And it became clearer to me that part of my work now for the presence of justice is to repair at least a little bit of that separation.
For the second reading, it's also from Embracing Rootedness in Radical Genealogy by Aurora Levins-Morales. Taking full responsibility for our legacy of relationships is empowering and radical. Guilt and denial and the defensive pull to avoid blame requires immense amount of energy and are profoundly immobilizing. Giving them up can be a great relief. Deciding that we are, in fact, accountable frees us to act. Acknowledging our ancestors' participation in the oppression of others, and this is ultimately true if you dig deep enough, of everyone, and deciding to balance the accounts on their behalf leads to greater integrity and less shame, less self-righteousness, and more righteousness, humility, and compassion, and a sense of proportion. At the same time, uncovering the credit side of the account, not the suffering, but the solidarity, persistence, love, hard work, creativity, and soul of our forebearers is also an obligation. We are responsible for carrying that forward into our own time and for calling on our kin to do likewise. For people committed to liberation to claim descent from the perpetuators is a renewal of faith in human beings. If slavers, invaders, committers of genocide, inquisitors can beget abolitionists, resistance fighters, healers, community builders, then anyone can transform an inheritance of privilege or victimization into something more fertile than either.
This practice, radical genealogy, ancestral recovery, finding and reconnecting with those who came before us, can be daunting. I so appreciate Aurora Levins Morales naming that it involves acknowledging our ancestors' participation in the oppression of others, and this is ultimately true of everyone if you really dig. In her essay, she talks about the experience of discovering the oppressions that her Cuban ancestors had perpetrated that she had not known about. So often, we find history told to us in binaries. Raise your hand if you've heard this one. Sometimes you hear, well, the white people knew best how to use the land and how to use other people, so they came and they conquered and they optimized everything. Ever heard that one? Right? Sometimes we hear, well, the white people were awful and they came and ruined what were otherwise perfect societies made up by people of color. Ever heard that one? Neither one of these captures the truth. It is important to be able to say that most people are a mix of flaws and virtues. Most people are focused on taking care of themselves and their family and their community. And it's important to see how the circumstances of their times acted on them and how they acted. So here's a story from that family line of mine with the Confederate soldier and the Revolutionary War soldier and the man who fought against Wampanoag people. The first person in that line to arrive in North America was a man named Ralph Hill. Ralph was born in England. He sailed to Massachusetts in 1638, and later he and 14 other men petitioned the colonial government for permission to start a new town. In 1654, they founded Billerica. Billerica was apparently notable in colonial Massachusetts because the land was relatively equitably divided among the families who founded it. Now, I am pretty sure Ralph and I would not agree on questions like the autonomy of women and whether you can drive indigenous people off land and claim it's yours now. And although I know that these things are present, I also wondered what Ralph and I might agree on. Among the folks that he did see himself in community with, he seems to have wanted to be fair. That's a heritage I can carry forward while expanding the circle of community beyond the people that Ralph would have recognized. I also learned that in his will, he left some of his property to the town to create a burying ground, a way of taking care of the community and tending relationships even with those who have died. And today, in Billerica, Massachusetts, there is a hiking park known as the Ralph Hill Conservation Area. It's a park that consists of 61 acres of forest, wetlands, and rock formations along the edge of the Concord River. It has a beaver pond. It has nesting areas for native birds. I really wish I had known about this when I lived out there because I would have liked to visit. Thinking about Ralph and about all the other hills in my ancestry helps ground me in a few things. First, it reminds me to have the humility to know that no matter what I'm doing today that I think is progressive and correct, like Ralph helping divide up the land equitably, I will inevitably be followed by people who look back and cannot believe what I just went along with. I look back and I say, Ralph, come on, women are people, man. Stop stealing land. What were you doing? And then I think, well, in 100 years or 200 years or 400 years from now, what will my descendants say about me? She flew on airplanes and she knew all about climate change. Can you believe it? They will not say that I was perfect. That is for sure. And second, when I think about all these ancestors who fell for the trick of systemic racism, all the people who have ever gotten conned into thinking that going along with a place in a racial hierarchy was best for their family, the best legacy I can create now is to do what I can to live a life of true solidarity, as deep and as wide as I can make it. It will never be as deep and as wide as I want. It will never be perfect, but I can try. I can know that my ancestors were people who left Europe and came to North America because they wanted safety and freedom and a good lives for themselves and their children. And they got tricked into saying, if you'll put others down, you'll get a little more of what you want. They were part of terrible wrongs, sometimes personally and sometimes passively. And I don't know very much yet about how they questioned or pushed back on those systems. But I do understand wanting safety and freedom and a good life for yourself and your children. So like that movement, from peace as the absence of conflict to peace as the presence of justice, here's how I am understanding these things now, on behalf of my ancestors and those yet to come. What I want is the safety of a society that cares for everyone, with health care and housing and food, with respect for the natural world, with the absence of oppression. I want the freedom for each and every person to be their truest self without stigma or prejudice. And I want a good life for my child, which means I want her to know the complicated truth of her ancestry, to hold those truths with compassion and empathy, and to live in community and solidarity with others. As I get further into this work, I am grateful to know that there are organizations, like one called Coming to the Table, an organization that supports all who wish to acknowledge and heal wounds from racism rooted in the United States history of slavery, which works to create relationships of linked descendants, like David and Pat, who we heard about in our story. So wherever you are in connecting with your ancestry, whether you know broad strokes or a lot of details, whether you have frustrating gaps or a wealth of information, I hope you will join me in the life-giving work of making who we are now into the realization of the best hopes of those who came before. Let us take our inheritances and transform them into something more. May it be so. Will you join me now in a moment of meditation? These words from Elandria Williams, one of our UU leaders, gone from us too young. Put your feet down because we are about to do embodiment. Close your eyes. Breathe in and out. When you hear the word liberation, liberatory spirit, liberatory life, liberatory possibilities, what does that conjure in your soul? When you hear, we are the liberating force, spirit, light, and love, what does that conjure in your spirit? When you hear that we have the power to transform the world around us, what does that mean in your bones? When you hear, we are the people that we have been waiting for, we are, how does that feel in your blood? We are the light, We are the wisdom. We are the ancestors. We are those yet to come. How do we fully hold all of that in ourselves? Open your eyes. Look at the people around you and go out and organize. May it be so.
How we share of ourselves with one another and with our community fosters deep connections with those around us, as well as those who came before us and those who follow in our footsteps. Each week, we support the Marion Poe Food Share through making donations that may be placed in a little red wagon, which is coming forward to the front of the sanctuary. And for the month of March, we travel overseas to support our Unitarian partner church in Schumann-Falva, Transylvania, Romania, where the roots of liberal education and religion in Unitarianism first started over 400 years ago. In speaking with Reverend Erzabet and asking what they are doing that we could help with, she mentioned something that has been mentioned a few years before, but they're still working on, and that is helping support their 200-year-old building. They are in the process of talking to architects now and contractors, and she said anything that we can send over to help with that would be greatly appreciated. To understand how your few dollars help them so greatly, 100 of our US dollars is 478 of their lei. So however you're able to help and support both the Salem community and our partner church is greatly appreciated. You may look at our website to help donate. You can donate through placing items into the baskets that are going to be passed. And as always, thank you for your time, pledges, and connections with all of us. Take care. Next Sunday, we get to hear from one of our homilists, Greg Greggs, and the title is rather interesting and intriguing. It says, "The Abandoned Cemetery of Dirty Underwear." I don't know if we can relate to this or not. Apparently it's a story about ego and so forth, but slide has been changed, so I can't tell you anything more than that. You'll have to come and find out for yourselves. And I hear there is a special creative process going on between Greg and Barbara and David that you will definitely want to be witness of. And one more thing before Monica talks about other items that are going on. You may have noticed a lovely bouquet of flowers outside. It's from a beautiful wedding that was here yesterday. And please, I know it's not the flower communion yet, but please feel free as you leave to take it. Take one of the flowers home with you as a reminder of the joy and justice of the world.
A couple of announcements to share. First off, our fancy new paper order of service system has some upcoming events for today, for this week, for next Sunday to plan ahead. You can find information there. Today, I want to highlight 3 special things. The first is that if you are a bylaws nerd like me, you will be excited to know that our bylaws revision team and board members will be staffing a table in Hanneman Hall during coffee hour where you can pick up the one-pager about the revisions to bylaws, and you can help come up with ideas for names for a couple of committees that are changing some of their mission and therefore might be in the market for a new name. Consider stopping by. Okay, I get a visual aid from this next one. Our talent development team and Deborah Emeny have painted this lovely appreciation box. It says, "Be kind, say something nice," and there's bees. This is going to be hanging up in Hanneman Hall. This is a chance for you to provide positive feedback and appreciation for all the many hands and all the time that makes this community happen. So watch for this to be installed sometime in the next week or two, hopefully also with paper and pens, so that you can create more and more and more appreciation among us. And finally, after you have a chance to get some coffee and refreshments, you're invited to come back into the sanctuary. Today we are having a social justice forum. We know that many people who are in and connected to this community are doing many different things to try to make a better world. This is a chance to hear a little bit about the many connections that we represent. And if you hear something that sparks your interest, gosh, I'd like to get involved, I'd like to volunteer there, you will know now someone you can go to ask for information and to buddy up and go along. So if you're able to stay, please do get some coffee and then come on back in and share in that forum. That'll start at noon? At noon, okay. Excellent.
So as Monica takes the light of our chalice, lighting the social justice candle as a symbol of the light we carry out into the world, we then extinguish the other chalices with the words of Adam's slate. Be kind. Be brave. Be just. Be merciful. Be hopeful. This is how we keep the chalice flames burning until we are together again to light them anew.
And now please rise. Oops, I did. Now please rise in body, in voice, or in spirit to join in singing our closing hymn, number 346. It's all right. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me. Come sing a song with me that I time. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me. Come dream a dream with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me. Come walk in rain with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me. Come share a rose with me, that I might know your mind. And I'll bring you hope when hope is hard to find. And I'll bring a song of love and a rose in the winter time. Tell them that it's in here.
Please join hands if you would like, and join in saying our closing words. If you need a hint, I know you don't.
If you need to keep a hand free to hold an order of service so you can read the words, they are in here. You can touch elbows instead.
Are we ready?
Yes.
All right. May
May faith in the spirit of life, hope for the community of earth, and love for the sacred in one another be ours now and in all the days to come. Okay. I'm still on.
Yes, and that's right.